Okay, so on to our topic for today, how EVERFI moved from no automation to continuous test generation in 9 months. So it's my absolute pleasure to introduce our two expert speakers from EVERFI today. So first, Greg Sypolt is Vice President of Quality Engineering at EVERFI. Greg brings 20 years experience in quality engineering transformation and is also a long-standing pioneer of model-based techniques. So brings a phenomenal wealth of experience and knowledge. I look forward to hearing from Greg today. So we're also joined by Sneha Viswalingam. Sneha is Director of Quality Engineering at EVERFI and the founder of the Code Her Stories podcast. So Sneha is a real leader in quality engineering with expertise in developing automation frameworks for web-based and mobile apps. So thank you, both Greg and Sneha, for being here to present today. Before handing over to Greg and Sneha, I'd also like to thank Curiosity's webinar co-hosts, Cypress and Applitools, who have worked incredibly hard to make today's webinar happen. So thank you all. And I think with no further ado, Greg, Sneha, I'd like to hand over to you to kick off the session today.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. So let's get our slides up. And play. We good to go?
Yes, you are. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. So Sneha and I is going to kind of talk about our journey around no automation and doing test generation in 9 months. So I'm Greg Sypolt, Vice President at EVERFI Quality Engineering Team. I've been here for about 2 years, and we've been part of this digital transformation of going from manual testing and scaling automation here at EVERFI. As Tom alluded, I've been in the industry for 20 plus years around quality engineering. So if you want to, contact me later with this, you can hit me up on Twitter, LinkedIn. You can find more information on my GitHub page, or also just the things I'm posting on LinkedIn. So happy to be here today. Sneha.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sneha Viswalingam. I live in Pittsburgh on the East Coast of the US. And I started my journey as a test automation engineer, and I've designed and architected test frameworks. And I also worked as a software operations engineer, where I worked with tools to improve developer productivity. And at EVERFI, in my current role, I lead the course QA team, where we test all the courses provided by EVERFI by creating test automation and internal tools to make the process more efficient. So by the way, we are hiring. So for this team, especially, where we continue building internal tools. So after watching this presentation, if you are interested in joining the team, please reach out to us on LinkedIn.
Awesome. So, some of the key takeaways from today is really, understanding our journey and how we created this kind of like baseline foundation where we're driving this positive change across the organization. And we're trying to do that very early on and understanding that testing problem. And our initial testing problem itself was everything was manually tested, and it took us a long time to test all of our courses. At EVERFI, we have 100 plus courses. And so testing all those can be a lot of work, right? And so we really are going to show you today of how we brought the future of model-based testing here and helping you understand what that is. And maybe it will be a good fit for you. And the technologies that are driving this transformation around using kind of Cypress, generating test code there from Test Modeler and Applitools. And so this journey we're kind of going on today is how we continue to be more efficient, faster, and try to remove those bottlenecks around innovation and stuff. And that innovation is really just trying to paint this picture around our quality evolution from day zero until how we scaled in 9 months around test generation, and also how we're looking into the future itself. So let's just take a look at the very beginning itself. It took us probably over a month or even months to test various courses to get out into production. And so that really called for a change. And we was really committed by kind of introducing model-based testing because we thought that was a really great fit to help us along our journey to remove manual testing for those 100 plus courses to transition to model-based testing. In 3 months in this journey, we was able to kind of reduce our actual test execution down to weeks by modeling the system. And modeling the system was around modeling the course components that actually drive our courses. We was able to utilize that test generation with algorithms from Test Modeller. With all these collection of models, we was able to generate Cypress test code and Applitools visual assertions. And the one thing around Test Modeller allows us really to see is that visualization using their visual flowcharts to understand the coverage that we're actually providing for those courses. But the journey wasn't over. We wanted to move faster. We wanted to be more efficient. And then we introduced some innovation by building a test generation command line tool that allowed us to build this API to communicate with Test Modeler to generate our tests much faster, but also to try to make our tests more reliable and maintainable, building best practices around adding data attributes to our components and finding other ways to create that known state in our system itself. In that 6 months, we was down to hours of testing these courses. But the way our courses was developed in that 9-month journey so far, we continue to add more innovation by the model generation command line tool that Sneha is going to kind of present how it actually works and allows us to generate courses, Cypress test code or Applitools test code within seconds. So we went from this journey of like taking us months to test this down to seconds to generate this test and execute it against the system. But our journey's not done. It's never an end destination, right? We're looking at ways of doing targeted generation and various other things. I'll talk about that later in the presentation itself. Maybe model-based testing is new to you. So why did we choose this path? Well, I think before you understand how we chose that path, I think you need to understand some of the pain points, and maybe you need to kind of reflect on some of your pain points. When we looked at how our courses are built and how they scale courses here at EVERFI, the traditional testing methods really wasn't going to really work for us. We would not be able to kind of test all those pages by creating these common scripts or all the permutations and combinations of those tests. We needed something that was reusable across our whole entire system. So throughout this presentation, you'll kind of see some of our pain points and how we innovated to try to make this a much faster, more efficient way for us here at EVERFI. And that solution really was model-based testing. If you're not familiar with model-based testing, we're going to kind of give you some baseline foundational pieces of this. Model-based testing is really, think about it from this standpoint. From the image on the left, the model really describes that system as a behavior. It could be an input, an action, or even a condition or an output itself, right? But when you create that model, it's a reusable piece of code, which is really a digital twin of how the system behaves. So I could have a model of like a drop-down model and a component where I can model that. And that allows us to have better quality coverage throughout the system that is documented. With Test Modeler, you'll have that visualization in their flowcharts to understand how the tests are being generated and understand the coverage you have on that particular scenario. And when a model is ready, we can automatically generate that test. Or if that model needs to be updated, we can regenerate the test so we're not updating hundreds or thousands of tests from that standpoint and run them against the system. The technologies that are driving this here, I think it will help you understand how we're driving that change here at EVERFI. But before we dive into understanding how we're driving that change, I think you need to understand why we thought model-based testing was the best choice here at EVERFI. We all know those other forms or traditional testing itself is kind of a common test script, a boilerplate type of test that has a series of fixed commands, assertions, and makes up all these scenarios. You may use page object models, which also leads to duplication, or you'll find yourself copying, pasting code from one test to another. That's not really going to be scalable for what we was trying to accomplish here with our course generation side of things. So when you look at why we chose model-based testing, one, it describes the system behavior of our course, but also the behavior of a component. It leads to that lower maintenance. And the reason why it's lower maintenance is because you're only coding that one-to-one relationship between a model and a web component. As I described before, that drop-down menu, you're modeling that piece there. It leads to easier development and maintainability, higher coverage, and there's many other things you can see here that allows you to kind of lead to model-based testing. But the one thing I have to describe, model-based testing, there's a lot of upfront effort that needs to take place, and it's a steep learning curve because it's a little different in your traditional way of doing testing itself. And I'm hoping today we're able to paint that picture for you all to kind of see the advantages of using model-based testing. So technologies that are driving this learning transformation. Well, ultimately, it started with Test Modeler, trying to find a model-based testing solution that would work for us. And Test Modeler allows us to do various things in the sense of creating reusable models where objects, those functions that allows us to generate the models from there. There's test generation. So we're leveraging their system to kind of document the system behavior of our courses and then generating the tests for our courses within seconds itself. It creates that test artifact. The good thing about Test Modeler is it's agnostic in the sense that we can use any technology, and we decided to use Cypress. Cypress, it allows us a lot of advantages from one, around the, not even from the test generation side of things, but their dashboarding allows us to give that visual picture of how the system is working and helps us troubleshoot, issues when they do occur. It has a great integration with GitHub and allows us to kind of scale our parallelization in CI very easily. We're using Applitools, allowing us to use their ultra-fast grid, or where we can actually do all kinds of testing across cross-device, resolution, validation. But it also has Storybook testing, Slack integrations, a lot of great things that allows us to kind of build this visual kind of regression of our course components itself. And what drives everything from a continuous integration standpoint between these other three tools is we use CircleCI as kind of our testing grid. Cypress integrates nicely with that, along with Applitools, where we can easily trigger things or have things on the schedule itself. So these are four of the technologies we're using that kind of drive this transformation from that day 0 to 9 months around our course automation. That was a lot. I've been talking pretty quickly, and I want to kind of give you some visualization of how this kind of works. Sneha is going to kind of talk about MODELLO, which is our internal test solution that allows us to go really fast. But it communicates with Test Modeler, and then Test Modeler will communicate with GitHub, where we have our source code located today. And when you're generating the test, it goes to a test engine, and it reads a template in Cypress, and it starts generating all these different types of tests. As on this course component, we have a mouse, a keyboard, accessibility, and visual test. We run that through CircleCI and a parallelization of 12, and it allows us then to scale this out to Applitools across all these other permutations of the visual side of things from a browser or also the resolution itself. So this is kind of the flow of understanding how we generate tests at the component level. And this will understand how we actually test everything at a very modular level also. But to take it a step further, the course generation side of this. So we have all these components. We've modeled the system from a carousel to a accordion, a button. That is fed into Test Modeler, and that will also generate these test generation sequences. So our course has multiple pages, and it could have multiple components on those pages. So by modeling out the system and running it through their test algorithms, we can actually generate these different sequences by easily just leveraging those components and regenerating that. So hopefully this will give you a visualization of how we go from a very small modular of the component to when we get into the actual test generation of our test sequences of our courses. To take a closer lens and something here on the far right side is a kind of a screenshot of like a course itself. And so you have a header, then you have kind of the a carousel, and then at the bottom you have some buttons. So in the middle, you can see that we have basically modeled out this carousel, and we are able to count the actual dots of how many times the carousel till it gets to the ends. So this is automatically generated when we're running the test itself. It understands how many slides would be in that carousel. We can also easily turn on Applitools by following this kind of like easy conditional switch by enabling it or disabling to generate an actual screenshot. The same thing applies when you get to a button. You can easily model this and pass in a selector by with that data attribute being different on different buttons. That allows us to have reusable code across our system. Let's dive into a little bit of the advantages of using the Cypress dashboard. So I'm going to kind of play this little demo here. This is Vulkan. This is where we kind of have all of our course components. And this is the Cypress dashboard as a source of truth. On the left, there's a lot of things around the branching, the analytics around this particular project, also on all the latest runs. So as we dive into this run status here, this allows us to understand all the runs of our actual test suite itself. Duration, you can see their average duration is around 7 minutes on this page with one currency. But as I kind of scroll down here in a second, we're trying to increase the currency to like 17 to 19 machines and get that down to 50 seconds. So we went from 7 minutes to 50 seconds. So a lot of good information. There's some filters up here on the top of this where you can go to branching, go back to a particular date, or also weekly, monthly statuses. That's a test size. I think the failures here is a really good example where you can understand what tests are actually failing. You can dive into that test to understand what failures are happening here. All this information is captured on the dashboard. It helps speed up the actual troubleshooting of your tests when they're all also failing. This is understanding the slowness of our tests. So if you have a slow test, you could start focusing on why that test is a little slower. This probably is a really important page here around the most common errors. So as you're looking at your system, you're having a lot of issues, you can kind of pinpoint exactly what's going on. And maybe that's what's resulting some of the flaky tests throughout your system. So last little piece, we're going to dive into one of those last runs where it provides a lot of great information here. So if we're going to go down to one of the runs that has some failures, you notice here we have 40 pass, but then we have 2 failures. And then here on the left, the assertion error, there's 2 common errors where the data attribute was not found. So we were able to see those 2 failures. You could also filter this in the test results by coming here. In here, we can actually drill down into this test. We see there's 2 attempts on this particular test. We rerun it one time. It has the exact same failure. So maybe we see the failure happen on line 137. We can look into the screenshot to get a better visualization to see what possibly could have happened. Or we can also watch the video of that failure here on this particular dashboard itself. But on that far right side, you can scroll down and you can also see the test definition of the actual test that was generated for us. And there's a lot more information based on the performance here, based on how long that test took, if there was any flake rate, failure rate, also the history of this, all the artifacts from this execution, and then run times and previous runs here. A lot of great information that you can find here. The spec, this allows you, if you're running things in parallel, if it's run across multiple nodes on CircleCI, you can pinpoint that up here and go directly to CircleCI itself. So next is Applitools, the last technology that we're leveraging, and all this visualization helps us determine the failures, but also gives us a great picture of how our system looks. So diving in, taking this example course here, we can see that there were 25 failures based on how many configurations we was passing across. We can pinpoint these failures really quickly here. As I'm navigating through this right here, I'm going to drill down into this failure here and try to understand what happened with this failure. And so if I zoom in and then go to the next button is supposed to be disabled, but it was actually enabled when we ran the test. And our expectation is it should have been disabled. This example is a great example where possibly an expected change happened within the system itself. The pause button appeared on the page and maybe it was supposed to be expected design. We're able to easily accept this as a new baseline or actually reject it itself. Applitools provides a lot of other great information from root cause analysis to really pinpoint the issue, but it really tells you how your system looks visually, and it's really the source of truth of what your customers see out there today. And now I'm going to hand it over to Sneha to walk through the rest.
Sure. So in this section, I'm going to show you a high-level view of how we use the test modeler to create a simple model and generate tests. Moving forward in the slides, we will take a deeper look at test modeler. So over here, we're first creating a new model, and test modeler is basically a test case design tool, and each path represents a test case on its own. We have many actions like start, end, waypoint, tasks, subprocesses, conditions, and so on. And a model must always have a start point and an end point. And all actions would be connected to one another by using arrows or edges, we call it in this. So together, these actions form paths between the start and the endpoints. And then tasks can have multiple edges, and that will denote the different routes through the system's logic. So once we create the variables and map the models and create the path, we will be generating them in Test Modeler. So as you can see, this is having a model start and end point, and all the actions are connected to one another using edges and arrows. And then we generate the tests, and we can actually see the progress, and Test Modeler will provide a status when the tests are being generated. And then we can download the source code, and then you'll see the Cypress test that is generated as part of this. Here's the Cypress test that we just generated using that test sequence. Moving on, so at EVERFI, we have about hundreds of courses. And with new modules of courses being built almost every sprint, there's changes being made to the courses. And those changes will lead to course map changes, and that will require course automation maintenance. And another pain point that we also had was understanding all the reusable models and figuring out where they are located in Test Modeler. So the question that was always in our mind was, how can we make this process better, and how can we make this process more efficient? And that was the introduction of our in-house tool called MODELLO. And MODELLO is a tool that generates models for EVERFI courses based on the course structure, and then generates the test suite from that model. So let's take a deeper dive on what how we use MODELLO. But before we actually get into that, let's take a look at how EVERFI courses are developed. Next slide. So this is what it looks like. So let's take a look at how the courses are developed in EVERFI. The EVERFI engineering team has built an in-house content management tool, which is called Forge, and this is Forge. Forge is an Electron app that was built within EVERFI to help scale the growth of building courses. So using the Forge app, the team can actually build a course by dragging and dropping the elements of the page. And one can manage the modules, pages, activities, groups, menus, and content of the course within the Forge app itself. So that is how we build courses in EVERFI. Now let's start with our end-to-end workflow, just understanding how MODELLO fits in the end-to-end workflow. So first, starting with Forge, we have the Forge tool that builds our EVERFI courses. And then the EVERFI courses have some JSON files that has all the information about the course structure of the course. So MODELLO takes all that information from the course and transforms them into useful data structures, and then creates a sequential maps of the pages and the blocks. So based upon the structure, MODELLO then fetches the models we built in Test Modeler using the Test Modeler API, and then it generates the tests. And then the UI tests are generated, as you saw in the demo, as Cypress tests. And then we use CircleCI as our testing grid. And then we have visual tests performed using Applitools. Now, moving on to the next slide, let's take a look at how MODELLO actually works. So as I mentioned before, the EVERFI courses have some JSON files with the course structure and all of that in it. And MODELLO takes a compiled JSON file from the course, and it generates a model based on the structure of the JSON files. And then the logic that is built in is that MODELLO reads the JSON files, parses it, transforms it into some useful data structures for creating models, all of this using the Test Modeler API. Then it takes each page in the course and recurses through the course structure, building up a map of the pages. And then there is a sequential map of pages and their associated blocks. And then these pages can be iterated to create a model filled with subflows that model the blocks for each page. For example, if a page contains a carousel, then the code will find the carousel block in test modeler and drop that in the model for that particular page. Now, let's take a look at a demo on how this works. So over here, I have cloned the course called Grow, Savings and Retirement. And if you see here, we have some JSON files, which will have the information about all the components and blocks in this course that this course is made of. This will help us generate a skeleton of what the course is actually supposed to look like in a test modeler model. And this is what our tool MODELLO will be using for the most part to build the models that we will be creating tests out of. Next, we will create a new model in the test modeler. Here we will be adding a globally unique tag so that we can use that tag instead of the model ID and the profile ID. And we can just refer to them and generate it using the tag as such. Now, when we open this, we'll see that there is no real models inside because we haven't created anything yet. Now I'm installing MODELLO using the npm command, and MODELLO is a CLI tool that is built using the native ESM modules, which is a fairly recent addition to Node.js. It's installing right now, and after the installation is complete, we will be going ahead and giving the MODELLO init command, because all we need to generate an entire Cypress test suite from the models in test modeler is just a config file to run the generate API, and this command will get us the generate config file. So now I want to quickly walk you through the EVERFI course that we are testing in this particular demo. This course is called Grow, Your Savings in Retirement, and this is a test link that we're using currently. We have about 4 modules in this course that you can see here, and the course is structured in a way that it is kind of made of modules and assignments and pages, and then a bunch of different components in each page. And we used to build automation by dragging and dropping combinations for each page of the module. And using model-based testing was a great idea, and we could, reuse the components and drag and drop and build the combinations needed. But we kind of wanted to go one step further and automate this process itself so we can do it faster. Now that we've seen what a course looks like, next I'm going to be using the MODELLO model command. The MODELLO model command is the one that generates a model for the particular course, and I'm going to be adding to the description in the generate config file and the unique tag that we used while creating the model in test modeler. And for this particular command, which is MODELLO model, I'm going to be specifying the scope that is module 1 over here. And then I'm going to be using the tag, which is the same unique tag that we used while creating the model and that we've used in the generate config file. And then I'm going to be specifying the URL of the module that I want to generate automation for. Now this will iterate through all the pages in that module for each interactive block, and it'll attempt to find the subflow that matches that block. And if that subflow exists, then it is dropped into the target model. And if it does not exist, it'll drop the subflow for the click next to navigate to the next page, basically. Now you'll see that it's saved with a model number. So if we actually click that link, it will take us to the link to the model where all of this was generated. So previously when I showed you, this particular folder was empty, but now after we ran the MODELLO model command, you'll see that all of these models were generated automatically. So it's a pretty huge module. So you'll see how many nodes there are in this. So this is like end to end for a module. Now, next, let's look at the Modello generate command. The Modello generate command is the one that generates the entire Cypress test suite, including downloading the test from test modeler and saves it here in the project folder. So it's generating the test path over here for Grow module 1. Takes it from the description and uses the model tag. And then you can see that the test file has been saved, and this is the Cypress test file that was just generated for module 1. Okay, so now that we've seen how the Cypress tests are generated, next let's take a look at the next command, which is a Modello run command. The Modello run command is actually a wrapper for Cypress run or Cypress open with some custom logic that resolves the dependencies and sets up the right path and all of that. It makes it easier for us. Now, so Cypress opened up, and now you can see the tests are going to be loading and they'll start executing soon. So this is how we use our Modello tool from end to end to kind of generate and run test automation. And this brings us to the end of this demo. So that was how Modello works. Moving on, let's take a look at how our productivity in the team has increased after we started using Modello. Next slide. So starting with speed of modeling the system. With the use of Modello, the speed of modeling the system has drastically changed from about maybe 3 hours of modeling a module, depending on how complicated it is, to about 3 minutes or even seconds sometimes. The next is the number of courses. So we have increased the coverage of the number of courses that we have built automation for. As I mentioned, that we have about 100 plus courses in EVERFI, with new courses being built every sprint. And we have about 80% of the courses that are built using the Forge app that's automated. The next is accelerated transformation. So we were using vendors for crowd testing, exploratory testing, and all of that. But now we are on track to kind of completely use automation for about 80%, 85% of the testing needs starting from August of 2022. And the next one was quality coverage. Quality coverage has increased with the number of courses that we've been able to cover automation for using Modello. And then we started shifting left. That is the team that builds the courses using the Forge tool will now be able to use Modello to automatically run automation to test the code as soon as they publish a module. So it doesn't even have to, the entire course doesn't need to be completed for it to come to QA to get tested. As in when they finish modules, they can test their own code and fix any changes as needed. So we're completely shifting left over there. And then boosted productivity. So course map changes and any additional pages that are added, any editing that's been done to the course or any sort of things are made changes that's made to the courses are not a big deal anymore. Before it was a big deal because then we had to be notified and we had to like change the automation and make some changes there. So right now, all we have to do is a regenerate command and then the tests are built again perfectly. The next is collaboration. So this tool really helps with collaboration and brings in the quality mindset. And that quality is everyone's responsibility because we're all one EVERFI team now trying to build a quality and injecting the quality mindset, at every step of building the product. The next is quality of delivery. So with increased coverage of automation, we're able to support faster delivery cycles and with higher quality. And cost savings, obviously, with reduced vendor services for exploratory testing and crowd testing needs, we've been saving money because of using Modello and model-based testing.
So I'm going to wrap us up with the future of test generation at EVERFI. So earlier on, I think one of our next steps is around targeted generation, really understanding if a change happens at the actual component itself. So if a change happens in the drop down, we just need to actually test that change on that particular component rather than running the whole entire suite. We just generate the test for that particular component. Or maybe in the course we add a new module or we add a new page, we just generate that module itself and test it out to make sure that everything is working as expected. So one, this allows us to be more efficient. Is there a possible risk in the sense of only doing targeted testing compared to running everything? There's always a risk if you don't test everything all the time, but this allows us to be more efficient with our time. Another one is around trying to speed up the process rather than regenerating something that never changed, is really casting those generated tests somewhere saying, did anything actually change with the model itself? If nothing's really changed, let's just use the last cached version of that generated test and just execute it. So that will save us some more time in our actual build processes overall. We continue to improve the branching strategy to where it's a lot easier for us to branch. And so that's one of the things we're focusing on. And one of the last things is exploring how we can actually build model-based testing around our videos, because we have videos in our courses, we have audio, and that's some of the other things we're going to be working on in the next 3 to 6 months. So credit, who all made this happen? Really, there's a lot of people that's been involved in this journey itself, and I myself is just giving some direction as a product person and bringing my knowledge around model-based testing. But, everybody on the left has helped with Modello and this whole journey. Everybody's listed here throughout this whole journey itself. And the event sponsors, this would not happen without these 3 technologies and allowing us to drive, transformation here at EVERFI. Test Modeller, Cypress, and Applitools are a big piece of our actual quality platform. And lastly, we had some great imaging and, icons from Flatiron and also Unsplash, where we used to have our presentation. But ultimately, it came down to EVERFI's engineering and product teams that really embraced this change and understood our vision and allow us to actually scale automation here at EVERFI. So that said, just want to say thank you from Sneha and I. If you want to reach out to us and, chat more about this or just in general geek out about testing, we're available with all these various channels, and thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Greg. Thank you so much, Sneha. That was phenomenally interesting and inspiring as well. So we will be moving on to the live Q&A. So please do get questions to Greg and Sneha in the Q&A box. Just before we start the Q&A, we've got James Walker on the line, and James is Curiosity's Chief Technical Officer. He worked with Greg and Sneha, collaborated with them throughout some of this process. James, I'm wondering if you'd like to share any thoughts on the project that we've seen today.
Yeah, sure. I guess firstly, thanks, Greg and Sneha. That was absolutely amazing. Yeah, I love it. Just wrote in the chat there in capitals, awesome. So I think, just to kind of contextualize a bit, kind of what we've seen, I think, in my opinion, this is truly pushing, the boundaries of software testing, what we see in the landscape today. I think there's an awful lot of companies out there preaching and, talking about AI, machine learning, all these clever technologies. And in my opinion, this is kind of far beyond anything, anyone else is talking about, certainly any other company I've seen what they're doing. Is it AI? Is it machine learning? Absolutely not. Is it doing something hugely intelligent? Definitely, yes. You've gone from, spending weeks and weeks on automation to having stuff that's generated on the fly in seconds. Taking assets that were being produced anyway, these YAML scripts, these configuration files, and using them to, really accelerate, auto-construct test cases from them, which I think, if you speak to most organizations, that's kind of the dream. It's the holy grail of where people want to get to, right? So I guess, there's all these amazing technologies out there, neural networks, blah, blah, blah. But the reality is what we have seen today, is something that's truly intelligent. It moves the needle a tremendous amount. And, going from weeks to seconds is just utterly, groundbreaking. And I think that's a huge testament to the EVERFI team. They've been a pleasure to work with. They're fantastic, they're innovative, and just absolutely amazing. So yeah, guys, thank you so much for sharing this story. Absolutely love it. Thank you.
Yeah, to kind of add on to that, the one that is coming in, could you use Test Modeler for backend or API testing? Absolutely. So, we talked about the journey of courses. One of the things that we want to work with James is around using their accelerators around API testing. They've had some accelerators around Open API or Swagger docs, where it reads that Swagger doc and generates the actual API test. So that is something else that is on our roadmap in the next, 3 to 9 months itself also. There's a lot of questions here.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Greg. I think there's been a couple of questions actually about exactly that. Can we use Test Modeler beyond UI testing, also into the API and backend? So I don't know, James, adding on what Greg said there, would you like to explain a little bit about what that looks like?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the model and what we've seen, the model is just a representation of some kind of function, some kind of component. It doesn't really matter if it's, a piece of the UI, an API, some kind of data transformation. The model is representing these different journeys, these different pieces of logic, and these different routes we can work our way down, something, right? So, we're just literally modeling different scenarios. We're either injecting them into a UI, we're putting them through an API endpoint, or we're putting them through some kind of parameterized, data transformation, right? So the model can really represent anything, I think.
Fantastic, thanks, James. And there's been in the Q&A box, a lot of high praise for MODELLO, and a couple of people asking if you're going to make it available or if there's any documentation. People have said that it's amazing. So is there any plans to make it available to share?
I would say probably over the period of the next maybe 9 months, we can work on open source as we report to a new company called Blackbaud that owns us, understanding their open source policies and stuff like that. I'm a believer of sharing these type of information. My previous team, we built an open source tool around model-based testing called Simulato. So absolutely, hopefully we can maybe open source it someday to where others can benefit from how we was able to scale our automation really fast.
Fantastic, thanks for that, Greg. So another question that's come in here then asks, EVERFI courses have both positive flow and negative flow, which then leads to a score. Does the test automation cover all scenarios, and is this auto-generated?
Not right now. Yeah, not right now, but that is definitely in one of our roadmap plans to moving forward to add even the negative scenarios.
Yeah, I would say the one thing around, model generation itself is you can put all those combinations or permutations of positive and negative flows on a particular page or on a particular component itself. So as we showed early on in the presentation, how you can manually put that, flow chart together, you could put the positive and negative. Our main focus is how fast could we generate test code from a course being created. And, we're down to seconds on that now, starting to chip off, some of those other things.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that. So this was an interesting question which came in, I think, which asks, how has the adoption of automation changed the manual QA process?
I can answer this. So with the adoption of automation, we started using manual QA more for the scenarios that we are not yet able to cover in automation, like audio testing in specific, video testing in specific, and translations and things like that. So we focus our manual efforts more towards those areas for things that actually needs a person to go in and look at it, as compared to regression testing, and all of that is being taken over by automation.
Yeah, it's the limitations of we just haven't had time to start exploring that. And as you saw in our future with the video and audio, I think with video, based on my experience, Applitools will help us kind of test some of those videos based on frames, where we can take screenshots on the video. And on audio, we were working on other ways to kind of understand if the audio is loaded and stuff. And right now it's just really hard with automation with those two areas. And that's where manual testing kind of fills in the gaps there. We use exploratory testing a lot right now in our courses, but our plan is to scale that off in 6 months and completely rely on automation 100% in the next 6 months.
Awesome, fantastic, thanks for that. So going on, I suppose, to another question here, which just asks, how are you measuring quality coverage? What quality coverage includes in your process and how you're measuring it?
Sneha, how are you measuring?
So I would say mostly in terms of, so we have a rubrics and metrics that we have assigned for, what is like the basic coverage look like for regression testing, what are the test cases and all of that. And out of that, how much are we able to cover using automation? And that's how we kind of cover our automation, measure our automation coverage.
Yeah, we work
like
closely
manual
with
versus automation coverage.
Yeah, and we've also been working with our front end, like we have kind of developers on loan on our teams too, especially Sneha's team, and we're building kind of insight dashboards around like trying to add instrumentation around Sypolt to kind of understand how many lines of code our automation is actually hitting on the front end components too, which is something fairly new from front end testing. It's really easy on the back end to try to measure your coverage there. And so we're leveraging that a little bit. We're also leveraging based on the stats of what type of tests are generated. So when you saw the components, like our strategy around component testing itself is like, I can navigate with a mouse interaction, a keyboard interaction, using X-Score for accessibility, and then also a visual side of things. So that's kind of our coverage on a component itself. And as long as we have those four put in place, then we feel like we got pretty good coverage on a component.
Fantastic, thanks for that. We've had a couple of questions coming about, the relationship to coding and coding in Cypress. So one person's asked, how often or how rarely do you write manual Cypress code for your UI testing?
So we do have a combination of both. So courses, as Sneha demonstrated today, is all model-based testing. It's all around test generation. I own and another director owns around our platforms. It's pretty much the traditional way of writing Cypress code. We mix API testing in with our end-to-end with visual testing. So our visual testing, we're separating into our own visual grid right now, our visual regression, and then having end-to-end mixed together. We've started moving model-based testing into those platforms too. But as you can see, one of the biggest things is modeling the system. That's what's probably the heaviest lift really. From our course components, we're probably 80 components, right, Sneha? As if I went into a platform, it could be, hundreds of components.
Fantastic, thanks for that. Another question, I guess, on the Cypress code asks, how are you maintaining it and whether you're using test modeler to regenerate those tests?
Yes. No, we no longer have to go back and make manual changes. All we have to do is generate again, and it'll automatically take control of what was changed, what was added, and generate tests accordingly. That's the maintenance like.
Yeah, the maintenance is really just on the model itself, right? Like if a developer adds something or changes something or fixes a bug, it's updating that model code and then regenerating the test. That's the beauty of it.
Fantastic. And I should say, we are getting a lot of questions coming in. It's just a heads up on that. It's a great presentation. It's got people thinking. Here's a question on something slightly different question, which is focusing on data, which is asking whether the tests are mocking data being set to the web application. And if they are, how are you validating regressions between the back end and the front end?
I'll take the first stab at this and you can add. So in courses, we have two strategies. One static. We generate the course in a static environment and we test the course with that static data. The next piece around Modelo is to generate the course also for the actual platform itself. As of today, it's a kind of a manual process of creating test data or a known state. A little bit around that is like we have an organization with a bunch of users or learners, right? But we're also working on more innovation around data generation right now with our team, where it understands how to scan the databases, understands the relationships, and inject that data into the system so we can create those other scenarios around our courses, but also around our platforms itself.
Yeah, to add on to that, we have a progress reset API. So all we do is just reset the progress and automatically, use the same set of data checks for every run.
Fantastic, thank you for that. And I guess to ask a slightly more general question then, which is, if given the chance, what changes would you like to add or remove to the current structure and workflow?
That's totally Sneha's question because it's coming from Mike.
Okay.
What changes would you add or remove to the current structure of workflows? I don't think I would remove any changes. Maybe like in terms of moving forward, we definitely want to make it even more automated where there's not a lot of manual intervention. We want to add Modelo, maybe add a call to action button in Forge itself so that as soon as a module is built in Forge, just click on it and then it creates automation and checks it and gives you a report in a dashboard. And we are actually we are working on another internal tool, which is going to be a dashboard, which is going to present all the findings and everything. So that is something that we definitely want to bring into the workflow as soon as possible to allow the product managers to kind of take a look at what are the courses that's being generated right now and what's the automation status look like. Is it ready for release? Just like taking a look at the dashboard and figuring out if they can release the course in its latest version or not, and all of that.
Fantastic.
I can answer another question here. Someone was asking around one, the positive and negative testing, but also validating custom business logic or edge cases around them. So Modelo really, how it's designed is understanding the course schema file, and then we basically map that schema to our models itself. And one of the things we're working on now is when we generate that course, it'll go into the platform will allow that custom business logic. The objective around that is we make sure that we generate a test that has that custom business logic from a UI standpoint. It's part of that generation piece of it. So courses could have different permutations. We have courses that have different pages kind of displayed in different states, or not states but different like permutations, right? So that business logic we're building into Modelo in the sense of reading that schema file.
Fantastic, thank you for that.
Tom, I also saw a question over here about what is the level of coupling between the tools you're using. If tomorrow you want to change Applitools, could that be possible? I think yes, because we just build models and we add functions inside. So right now we use AxeScore, we use Applitools, and we have plans for adding performance testing as well to this workflow for coverage. So all that is very easily possible with Test Modeler.
Yeah, I would say Test Modeler itself is very agnostic itself. Switching to different technologies, you all know, if I went from Selenium to Cypress, or I go Cypress to Playwright, like you're going to have to kind of change your syntax, right? So, but it's very scalable. That's the great thing about Test Modeler is it doesn't matter what technology you're using, really. You just need to kind of follow their best practices and their commands.
Awesome, thank you for that. So maybe I just throw one more question at you because I don't want to bombard you. Somebody's asking about the kind of tests that you're generating with Modelo, so can it do more than the basic positive and negative test cases, for instance, to validate custom business logic and edge cases? The question then is, what are your views on testing business logic with Modelo?
I answered that one. I forgot to answer it live. So that was part of us. We're able to generate tests based on that customization because we have different experiences with our courses based on maybe location and stuff like that. So we get that kind of covered built into that. One of the other things that we might not highlight too is knowing the state of the page too. We're also tapping in with Cypress. The one thing that we love about Cypress itself is we can also intercept API calls and make sure that that state of that page is completed before we move forward. Or as we actually submit and go to the next page, we can also intercept kind of like, the progress record also being updated to make sure that we're validating those API calls happening behind the scenes.
Awesome. Thank you for that. As you'd already answered that one before, I guess I'll throw you another bonus question, which is again from Mike, who asks, 0 to 9 months from no automation to test automation generation, what is the learning curve with all of these processes?
Sneha, you can go for it. I'm laughing at the last question.
Me too. I'm laughing at what makes Greg an expert and dance from Greg. So moving on to this question, what is the learning curve with all these processes? I think, so we started with using Test Modeller, by dragging and dropping. So it was pretty easy for anyone to come in and understand Test Modeller and start building tools. And then we gradually moved on to using Modello to use this. And it's pretty simple also. And more we work with Modello, we're trying to make it so much more easier. We have a great set of engineers working in our team. You would have seen them on credits. Don't poach them, I'm watching. But so, the more we use the tool, we are always thinking about how can we make this so much more easier so that the team members who are building the course, because when you ask a developer to also test, you're asking something out of them. So, we want to make it so much more easier for them. So the learning curve is not too much. It's just as good as using a CLI tool and understanding model-based testing.
Fantastic. Thank you for that and for all the questions that have come through, and Greg, Sneha, for the answers, and for our team answering in the text box throughout the session. So I think we'll probably bring the Q&A to a close there and go on to discuss a few next steps from today. So you should now be able to see my screen. And if you would like to carry on the conversation and carry on your learning from today, we really do encourage you to do so, and there are lots of different ways you can do so. So the first point would be, please do connect with Greg and Sneha using the details they shared during their presentation, and which we'll share with you as part of the slide deck, which will go out tomorrow. If you want to get hands-on, you can also try Cypress, Test Modeller, and Applitools for free. So I'll send you the links to do that, and we'll also email you a link to the Test Modeller for Cypress tutorial, which will help you get started with some of the approaches you've seen today. So Cypress have also shared some documentation for leveling up your Cypress skills and are offering you the chance to try the Cypress dashboard for free. And please do also check out the written case study focusing on what EVERFI have done, which is put out by Applitools. So lots of different ways you can carry on your learning from today. I think really all that remains to be said at this point is a huge thanks to everybody for joining, to Cypress and Applitools for co-hosting the webinar, but really a massive thank you to you, Greg, and you, Sneha. This has been a fantastic webinar. I've enjoyed it thoroughly, and based on the questions, I think everybody else has too. So thank you so much for that.